whenever you set kids and teachers free, they'll blow your mind. I continuously am in awe. And whenever I think there's a cap or a limitation to what they can do, they always show me there's more and more. And if we set them free to do this work, there's really no limitations to what they can do in changing the world.
Hi, and welcome to the KindlED podcast, where we dig into the art and science behind kindling the motivation, curiosity, and mental well-being of the young humans in our lives.
Together, we'll discover practical tools and strategies you can use to help kids unlock their full potential and become the strongest version of their future selves.
Welcome to the KindlED podcast. How's it going, Adriane?
It is going so great. I got to visit a micro school. Any day I get to visit a micro school is a good day in my book, Katie. How about yours?
Yes, just seeing all of these ideas in action is truly inspiring, and I love that I get to hear about it every day from my kids. Which reminds me of another school we're going to talk about today that is amazing.
Yes, and I cannot wait to talk to this principal because he is doing everything that Katie and I talk about on this podcast and how schools should be, and he's doing it in the public school system, and he just doesn't even ask permission. He just does it, and I think that is just so beautiful. And so, okay, let's get to his bio. So Mike Oliver is the progressive principal of Mountain View High School in Mesa, Arizona. Mike was the founding principal of Zaharis Elementary School, which was recognized as one of the 25 most innovative, inspiring, and coolest schools in America, and the exemplary school for literacy development in the U.S. by Scholastic. Mike has a doctorate degree in leadership and innovation from Arizona State University and has committed to reimagining what school can be. Mike's priority is his faith and his family. He is happily married to his wife, Trish, and they have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. Mike is passionate about running, having run over 30 marathons and several ultra marathons, including a 100-mile race. Okay, let's talk to Mike.
All right, let's do it. Mike Oliver, thank you so much for coming on the KindlED podcast. We're super excited to talk to you today.
I'm super excited to be here and to learn at your side. I love these.
I love it. All right, so we want to give our listeners a little background on you. So can you tell us, just tell us your story. What do you do in the world? Why do you do it? What change are you seeking to make in the world? What's your big why?
Okay. Well, first, I actually have an articulated why. It came from chapter 3 of Finding Your Why by Simon Sinek. And we did this as an admin team. And in the words of some of my leadership team, they said it was life altering. Mine was always there. The words came out a little more clearly going through this exercise that actually involves someone else working through it with you. But my why is this, to do what's best for kids, no matter what, and no matter the price to be paid, so their lives can become better. And sometimes that price to pay is really, really, really heavy. And it can't be negotiable, no matter the price. And that's how I've lived my professional life in trying to create great opportunities for kids and in communities and teachers and families and humanity. My story, I wanted to go into journalism, and I was actually a journalism major. Specifically, I didn't plan on sharing this today. Specifically, I wanted to be the sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun because I was a huge boxing fan, and most of the fights were in Vegas back when I was a kid. And in my first journalism class that I took, guess who the guest speaker was? The sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun. And I thought, this is a sign from above. I'm going to take his job. I'm young. He looks like he's about to tap out. And so it was the exact opposite, though. He said, the only takeaway, you know how years later there's just one nugget, but the only thing I remember him saying was, hey, there's a lot of benefits of going into journalism. It's a rich career, but if you're really looking to make the big bucks, you should change your major because there's not a lot of money to be made in journalism. You know, I was never the sharpest kid in the room, but why I left journalism and to go in the only profession that probably pays less. And so I went into education. I look back and I'm thinking I was supposed to go into education, but going into it for the money I may be in a category of one, that's ever chosen. But what a path it has been. It has been so rich for me. I broke my leg. I'd show you the boot. It's under the desk right now. Just found out today that it's going to have to stay on for a while. Training for a marathon a week from Saturday, because I want to stay fit and healthy and well so I can do this for as long as I possibly can, because there's so much work to be done in public education. By the way, I'm running the marathon with a boot. I've done 35 of them, but this one will be different because it'll be with a boot on. And I'll let you know how it goes. It's in Death Valley, appropriately named. But the story has yet to be written. There's pages that are pure and white that have yet to be. And when we leave, I'm going to read you a poem that really is my story. And it's one that I wrote. I thought it was to honor Zaharis teachers, but it really became my constitution. But at some point in my journey, and I'll just leave the story at this, I was awakened to find out that kids could be more than passive receivers of information, sitting in rows of desks, bored out of their mind, with a number 2 pencil in their hand, doing a worksheet, with little agency, little room for their voice, little room for them to create and question why and why not, and to be set free to think big thoughts. I was awakened to a different theoretical approach for life and learning. It goes beyond education. And it changed my life. And it changed my vision of what I thought school could be. I'm still trying to figure it out, and I will be for the rest of my days. But I love what I do, because there are some professions, if you wake up, you might create some kind of a product, or you might sell an extra solar panel, as honorable as those jobs are. But in our job, if we do our jobs well, we can alter lives. And I don't take that for granted. I love what I do. Absolutely love it. Every day I wake up with a bounce in my step. And the story's yet to be written. And I kind of gave you the beginning and the end. The end isn't there yet, but where I'm at now. And it's ever changing. So
I love that.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Can you take us through founding Zaharis? Tell us a little bit more about Zaharis and kind of your journey the last, 20 years, 25 years, you said?
I was an assistant principal at Adams Elementary School, and I'd worked with Madeline Hunter, who at the time was the biggest name that education had ever known, because she gave a language to direct instruction. Like when you hear formulating instructional objectives, task analyzing your objective into a sequence of sub-objective, teaching to one objective or sub-objective at a time, principles of learning like active participation, anticipatory set, closure, variables of motivation like the appropriate level of concern, success, knowledge of results, interest, feeling, tone. I know that model in my sleep. I can roll out of bed and tell you about what constitutes good quality direct instruction, which is based on a transmission approach to teaching and learning. You transmit information and knowledge from teacher to learner, and their job is to passively receive it and reproduce it to prove that they learn. And I knew that model better than anybody, and I made a lot of money with it because I worked directly with the legendary Madeline Hunter. And if you Google her, you'll get 300 hits because she was that kind of an impact. Well, while I'm an assistant principal, along comes this innovative educator, free-thinking, renegade maverick, warrior queen, Devin Isherwood, who was named principal at the school that I was at. And I took her on a tour, and we went through classrooms. And when we got back in what would soon become her office, she said, I said, well, what'd you think? What'd you think about your new school? She said, well, there sure were a lot of kids sitting in rows of desks with a number 2 pencil in their hand, doing a worksheet, staring at the front of the room where the teacher was. And I thought, well, duh, it is a school. What were you expecting to see? Because that was every classroom. Every once in a while, there might be an outlier, and everybody questioned what the heck they were doing. And she gave me a book. Gosh, I wish the book was accessible. It's called The Case for Constructivist Classrooms. I still have it with her name on it and her notes, so I could see her thinking in the margins. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's a completely different view of what it means to be a learner. And I started on this journey. And the schools that I ultimately would lead tried to reflect these theoretical views and values that I was trying to figure out as I was transitioning from a transmission-based practice and pedagogy to one of constructivism, where you learn through inquiry. And so I was principal of Alma School. I was there for 5 years. The school had moved quite a bit. Then I was put over at Bush, and I was there for 3 years. And then they announced that a new school was going to open up on Ellsworth and McKellips. And I found this. The only one that welcomes change is a baby with a wet diaper. And even that is not always true. Our oldest son, Colton, I hope he's not listening, did not like to have his diaper changed when he was little. So it's not even true with all babies. And when you inherit a school, and I had inherited too as principal, you inherit all these different views and beliefs and values. And trying to lead change is like trying to turn a battleship in a bathtub. Well, when they announced that this new school was going to open, even though I had only been at Bush for 3 years, and at the time, that was Camelot. We had the highest test scores. Everything in life could be measured by a standardized test score. And it was a great community, a lot of parent engagement, strong teachers. But I knew that schools could be more. And I thought, if I could build a school from the ground up and explain or ask, would you be willing to look at life and learning with a completely different lens and imagine possibilities that we've never ever seen before in the Mesa public schools? Would you be interested in embarking on a journey without setting any limitations of what we could do? And I took 5 teachers with me at Bush that opened Zaharis. And Zaharis was the answer to the question, do all schools have to be stuck in the Industrial Revolution when the model that we currently employ was born in the 1890s, when the aim was to put kids on assembly lines in factories where 95% of the jobs were at the time? And the answer wasn't no, it was no. We are going to prove that learning could be more exciting, it could be more relevant, it could be more meaningful, that kids could be set free to do more than follow scripts and programs, that they could do real world work that had a place and a purpose in the world. And so we built a school from the ground up, and we broke every rule that the Mesa public schools ever had.
I was going to ask, did you have a lot of pushback?
People would say, how did you get permission to do that? And I said, we didn't ask for permission. His answer would have been no. It would have been no. But I knew, everyone thought it was so bold and courageous, but I knew that parents would want to send their kids to places where they could experience joy beyond measure. Because when kids are doing work that matters and they can clearly see that it has a place in the world and they're set free to think big thoughts. And when we always talk about problem solving, we rarely talk about problem identifying. But when they can identify problems that exist in this world that we live in and then work together to come up with solutions and troubleshoot for problems, and learning enters into a dimension, and where there's agency, there's joy. And there's joy where people from all over the world will come to see it because they're drawn in by a model of inquiry, which is what we embraced. But when they get there, all they want to talk about is, how did you create a school where everybody's spirits are soaring on high? How did you create a school where everybody, the kids, the teachers, the parents, the volunteers, the playground aides, everybody wants to be here, and they're always smiling and laughing. And it's almost, it sounds like it's almost too good to be true, and it almost is. But that's the power of agency. And you asked me about Zaharis, and I'm at Mountain View. But if you don't have a mission, every road leads to nowhere, right? So we had to have an anchor. And I can tell you that in 19 years, this mission was never, ever, ever compromised, not one time.
Wow.
Now, you tell me if it was something that we just had that was wrote and rehearsed and we got it out, or we put it on a wall, like a lot of places have missions. Avon's, I think, was 3 pages long when we were forming one. I was looking at where are some exemplar missions, but our mission was this. Now, tell me if this doesn't speak to your heart and soul. And I hope I don't get emotional, because 19 years, I live this mission. And it means everything to me. It's part of who I am. I didn't leave Zaharis. My soul still exists in that community, but this is our mission. Still is there. Learning, caring, rejoicing, and working together to create a more just, compassionate, insightful world. When the unthinkable happened and COVID hit, Sunday night was after 10 o'clock when Governor Ducey, was it Governor Ducey? Schools had closed. And so the next morning at 8 o'clock, I found out what Zoom was, and we had our first Zoom meeting. And we said, What do we do? How do we live into this mission? And I repeated it. How do we live into this mission when school is no longer brick and mortar? How can we help kids to be physically distant, but not socially distant? How do we live into this mission during a pandemic? And while it took Mesa Public Schools 2 weeks to arrive at Florida Virtual, we started teaching the very next day. And we never followed a program because we didn't use scripts and programs of any kind, because programs have two very important stages: death and dying. And the minute that you implement your program, it's one day closer to death, because none of them persist over time. Think of a program that existed when you were kids. There's not one of them that's still around. Accelerated Reader hung around for a very long time, and people made millions of dollars off of it. But eventually we realized you can't measure success in reading with points. Literature can have so much more of an impact on a soul than who lived, who died, who broke a leg, what color was the dress. So we opened Zaharis and we broke all the rules. And when you're breaking rules, sometimes you have to cut a lock. We cut a lock when we found out that the governing board said elementary schools can't give out laptops, only the high schools, and because there's fear of spreading the pandemic. Well, we looked at our mission. Learning, is that going to occur if a kid doesn't have a technology device in order to access? Caring, we call it a curriculum of caring. Hi, boys and girls, call us after the pandemic. Hope it goes well for you. Working together, how are they going to do that without an ability, to tap into us? To create a more just, compassionate, insightful world. Every word of our mission was compromised. And I told you we never negotiated the uncompromisable mission. But our carts were locked up with padlocks. We couldn't get to our laptops. So we did what anyone would do when you don't compromise your mission. We got bolt cutters, we cut the lock, and we gave it out. And we said, if you don't create ridiculous policies during a pandemic, we don't have to cut locks to break ridiculous policies.
Oh my goodness. Can we give you a big round of applause?
But my entire career, everybody that knows me, from every board member to every superintendent, and we might hear passing music that still plays in my office, but that's part of life at Mountain View, so hopefully your listeners won't mind. But we cut locks, not for the ease or convenience, but to double down on our mission. Our mission at Mountain View is empowering learners to strive for excellence, connect with community, and carve pathways for the future. So there are locks yet to cut. I don't have to cut very many because our superintendent and superintendency and governing board, I'm here on a mission, and that's to disrupt stale, archaic, boring, antiquated high school, where the only place that you would typically find less agency is a prison system. And sometimes I think maybe they have more agency there than we see in public high schools across the country. So we're changing that. We're going 100 miles an hour, and it's exciting. Every day you get your butt kicked 6 times, and every day you have 6 or 7 times where you spike the football, and it's a fight worth waging, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir.
I remember being in high school and there was someone, it was like listening to someone give a talk to a bunch of kids, and they were telling us about prison, and they were literally just describing school. And I literally, in this environment where it wasn't cool to raise your hand and talk to the person, I literally raised my hand and I was like, you're describing school for us. Like, they're like, you have to ask to go to the bathroom. And like, I was like, yeah, we all have to ask to go to the bathroom. And then I remember my high school as a senior, a high school senior in honors English, the like thing that sticks out to me the most is like, this was like the height of my agency. Our teacher let us sit where we wanted. And I was like, wow, we have arrived.
That brings back so many memories, Katie. I didn't even think of that because my name was Adriane Kalefi, so A and C. So I was always at the beginning of the class. Like, no, because my first name or my last name were both at the beginning of the alphabet.
One thing about agency is, in order for it to spiral into the classrooms where kids are, teachers have to live with conditions of agency where they're empowered as well. And in order for it to spiral into the lives of teachers, school leaders have to be endowed with agency. And at Zaharis, it wasn't something that was bestowed upon us. We grabbed agency and we claimed it by creating a school that was so amazing, where kids were experiencing such joy and doing such great things that we were on an international stage. So we created the conditions for people to want to support what we were doing. And it's important, that in order for kids to experience it, it has to start at the top, where a school leader has agency, where teachers, can work within conditions of agency to do great things and not follow a scripted path. As we were talking about our experiences, we gave a tour to some people that came from Northern California.
Yeah, I helped coordinate. They visited a micro school as well. Was that this week on Monday? Yeah, Silicon Schools.
Yeah,
Yep.
so,
I was talking to Rob, and he told me he was visiting your school.
So I took them through an exercise. And I said, how many of you are parents? Just about every hand went up. I said, how many grandparents? A few hands went up. If you didn't have a kid, because I give tours, I've been giving tours of schools for over 20 years. I would say, well, think of one that means something to you. And maybe, if you have kids, or if you don't, if there's one that means you could kind of play along. And I would say, what are the dispositions that you want this one child to develop in life that you love so much? What are the behaviors, the attitudes, the virtues, the character traits in life? Who do you want this individual to become? You have 90 seconds. Go, speak into the silence. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have thousands of dispositions, and I've actually recorded them all. I have that data, and there's only one that shows up every time. But the group that was here last week, or this week earlier, hardworking, resilient, determined, compassionate, kind, curious, self-motivated, critical thinker, to love reading, to be confident, to be a problem solver, to be observant, to be a never give upper, to be generous, motivated, to care for others, to be confident, to be a risk taker, to be genuine. And the last disposition, as time ran out, is the one right at the buzzer that has always been there every single time without exception. And it's the only one that's there every single time without exception. You ready? What do you want for your kids more than anything? First and foremost, you want them to be happy. You want our kids to have joy in life. You want them to be happy. And these conditions, they flow through agency. When you set teachers and kids free to think big thoughts and do great things and to plug their learning into the world where it can make a difference. But to do that, you can't tweak the system that's been in place for over 100 years. It requires someone to come in and to completely reimagine everything about it. And, there's times, like I do my best thinking when I'm in my brainstem. Unfortunately, I say words that I have to repent for sometimes when I'm in my brainstem. I try, Lord knows I'm trying. But we had Matt Salmon, who was on the World's Foreign Relation Committee. He missed being governor by like less than 1%. He's been on the Senate and the legislature, and he knows practically every world leader. And we had Matt Salmon here before he went to ASU. He was here teaching with us. And there was something I wanted to do, but there was a system that had been in place forever that would suggest that we couldn't do it. So I got a marker, and I went to a whiteboard in one of my assistant principal's office, and I said, we don't change our mission to meet the needs of our systems. We change our systems to meet the needs of our mission. The systems need to be reimagined. And man, there's a lot of systems that have been in place forever. And sometimes we don't even know the origin of them or why. So to change it, it requires a complete reimagination. And that's what we're doing at Mountain View, completely reimagining the entire experience.
That's amazing. And something that you said is this experience is providing joy beyond measure, which is huge. And you're talking about agency and how this comes with this sense of agency. We talk about self-determination theory around here a lot, a sense of autonomy, competency, and relatedness, which I'm sure we're seeing a lot of those components in your schools as well. So in your experience innovating in education, what other components make this are part of the recipe to create an ideal educational opportunity from a child's perspective? Because I also am hearing a lot of what you're thinking and what we're realizing as adults, but speaking to the students, what are we seeing that are other components that really help bring this, experience joy beyond measure?
Well, the one of the things that I believe and that I've found, because I've worked with, I've taught at Arizona State University for a decade. I've been an elementary school principal for 27 years. I'm in my third year here. So Last night we were at Venetia's Pizza, and there was a group of little preschool kids in there, and they were running around, and the parents were just so embarrassed. And I said, "Look, these are my people. These are my people. I'm with big boys and girls right now in high school who really have the same needs. I don't treat them any different. And they respond favorably. They have the same needs. They want to be loved. They want to be needed. They want to be valued. They want to be recognized. They want to be celebrated. Just like the 7-year-olds, 17-year-olds are the same way. But I found too that learning, we don't follow a different formula for learning in life when we're working with 7-year-olds or if we're working with doctoral students. A world of inquiry where you're an asker of questions, where your questions guide your study and your thinking. When you work with others to collaborate, to try to find answers. I was at I wish my library right over here, if I had a really long arm, I'd grab a book called Building Thinking Classrooms by Peter Liljedahl. But we took a large group of teachers because we're always going to conferences and we're always visiting schools. So we can see new possibilities and break down our culture-bound biases and our ways of seeing and knowing the world. So we disrupt by going to other places and talking with other educators and going to conferences. And Peter Liljedahl at the National Council for Teachers of Mathematicians, he said something, and I thought, my goodness, he summarized this whole world of thought in one sentence. I admire people that can do that. You can tell I don't have that gift, unfortunately.
It'd be a really short podcast if you had that gift, so we're glad you don't have it.
Any viewing audience left at this point, for the ones that are still out there, he said, the smartest one in the room is always the room. I've used that when I was teaching a Sunday school class in church. And there's a guy in the room at our church that speaks 7 languages. He can translate from Hebrew and Aramaic he can talk about what the original translation was. I mean, he is a gospel scholar on steroids. And when I said this, everyone thought, no, it's always John Merrill. He is always the smartest one in the room. But even John would say, no, all these different ways of seeing and knowing the world and the interpretations. I was giving a tour of Zaharis in Marcy Lang's classroom. Now she's over here helping lead the instructional shift for big kids in high school. And a group came from all over the place. And as we were walking in, they were doing book clubs because that's what readers do. They read book clubs and they get together and they talk about it. Imagine that in school, giving kids time to read and come together to be part of a book club. And they saw that these kids were just lovers of literature and reading, and they loved reading. Even the boys that sometimes are reluctant readers because of what they've been taught that reading is. And so the parent said, or an educator, I'm not sure who it was, said, why do you like these book clubs so much? And this little gal, I can't remember her name, I can tell you where she was sitting. She looked up and she said, I feel like I haven't even read the book until I've come together to discuss it with my book club, because I learned to see that book in ways that I would have never arrived at on my own. Well, that's not just true with books. It's true with anything that we're doing, is we see the world through a different lens. I see it differently than you. I don't know your journey. I want to find it out someday. We have a richness of diversity at Mountain View. There's some places that see diversity as a problem to be dealt with. I look at it as a treasure trove of possibility. We have an incredible Native American community at Mountain View, and we try to tap that when and wherever possible to see the richness of their culture and the beautiful language and the foods that come forth from that culture and their customs. We have a Latino club where we had an event just last week where families provided their favorite Latino recipes, and our staff came and we were able to blend their world in, to the mix of what we're doing. But we have all these different ways of seeing and knowing. And when we come together with a spirit of inquiry, we see possibilities that we would have never arrived at on our own, sitting in a row of desks, working in isolation to reproduce something that you could pull up on your smartphone in less than 2.5 seconds. That world should have been disrupted when these things came along. And so that approach is also, and it's taking a little longer for us to redesign all the systems because we're including the voices of students and teachers and parents. We had a parent meeting and we're including voices, not to inform them of what we're doing, but to get their insights so they can co-create with us. Co-creating is a form of constructivist learning theory, and constructivist learning theory is anchored with the work of inquiry. It's the opposite of just telling people what to do. And that's how we create schools. It's how we create conditions for learning. It's how we approach everything in life, by being curious, by asking questions, identifying problems, working together to solve them. That's how we learn, and that's how we create schools.
And that's how you create joy in this creation. Like sometimes I did a lot of research into toy development, like what makes a good toy for a kid. And one of the things that I found was like to give them pieces and parts, so that they can make the play themselves. Like if you buy a toy that just has a button, it's like, wow, that toy creator was very creative. This is the same as, wow, that teacher was very creative in designing that lesson plan and creating this project. But they almost stole the creative work that could have been done by the kids. So I think that's a big part of joy, is that creation aspect. And in order for the kids to be the creators, we have to become a guide instead of like a disseminator of information. And I wonder, in your experience, if you find that is it more the adults in the world, in the education world, that are like that struggle with this transition, or do you find that kids struggle with the transition just as much?
Both do, and I'll explain why. But as you're talking about really being able to express and create, I firmly believe that this is a modern day civil rights issue. We have a lot of those, at work in our world. I think this is one of them, to be able to set kids free. Where, there's one student, he was our student body president. We made a video about what we were doing, and he said we shouldn't have to wait till we graduate from high school to experience life. And he said, as the system currently operates, he wasn't talking about Mountain View, he's talking about public education in general. He said it's not good for the mind, and it's not good for the soul. Where there's a lack of agency, you could see it just suck the soul right out of kids and adults as well. But I went out, I only had 15 minutes, so I went into places where I knew kids were free to create my first year here. I went into band, and I saw this kid on the drums, and I stopped him. I said, why do you like band so much? He goes, I get to express and create, express myself. Across the room, there was a kid on a xylophone. He's smiling. I go, why do you like band so much? Same answer. I get to create and express myself. I went into jewelry making, wood shop. I get to create and express myself. And those are places where you would often find the ability to create and express in schools. Not as often in math classrooms and English classrooms and science classrooms. By the way, only in school do you see those worlds compartmentalized. Nobody woke up this morning, Adriane and Katie, you didn't say, hey, at 8 o'clock, I'm going to think like a mathematician. Then a bell's going to, and then I'm going to go shuffle around like a hypnotized zombie and go into another room at 9 o'clock and think like a reader and a writer. And at 10 o'clock, I'm going to think like a scientist. Yeah. When you're doing real world work, the disciplines all spill into each other. But what we found when we started disrupting this, especially with our ninth graders, we created a teaming model where you might have an English teacher, a social studies teacher, a science teacher, and a Spanish teacher, which we do. They all four work together. They surround a group of kids and they share them, a group of about 90, and they give them experiences where they can learn through inquiry, identify a Latin American country. What are the sustainability systems that they have where science comes into play? What are the government structures that they have in place where social studies comes into play? They're reading, they're researching, they're writing. And when they, through inquiry, they share what their findings were together as a group, communicating in different ways, they do it in Spanish. And so all those four disciplines spilled into that one experience. And how you assess learning also is different because assessment drives instruction. But what we found was that when the kids came to us and we asked them to collaborate, they looked at their teachers like they had three heads. And the teachers were like, man, can't get them to do anything. I said, well, you have to keep in mind that they've had, counting kindergarten, they've had a 9-year experience of what it means to be a learner in school or a student. And all of a sudden, you've completely disrupted everything they know about a place called school. And they didn't have the dispositions to know how to learn that way. And we had to teach them some of the skills in order for them to be able to collaborate and perform, their exercises as learners working together. where they're thinking critically and not just reproducing. And it was the same with teachers. But there's a lot of schools, and this is key. This is absolutely key if there are any educators listening. There's schools everywhere that are redesigning the model of what it looks like. There's schools that are creating pathways and academies. But if there's not a parallel shift where teaching and learning also shifts, what I've been saying is it's like putting glitter on a turd. In the end, nothing changes. You can sequence classes in different ways, and you can change the whole system and the model. But if kids are still bored out of their mind because they don't have agency and they're not doing real world work, nothing in the end changes for kids.
Yeah. And what you were talking about is like the skill. I was just in a micro school this morning, and the guide, she's been with us for a couple years. She's Montessori trained. She loves creating this like Socratic environment. And she said, there's something going on this year. And she added 2 more students this year. So she has 12 now, and they are in a Montessori school. So lots of freedom with the space, and there were no desks and chairs. There were like random tables. The kids were moving about the space. And she said, there's some kind of feeling this year so far that it's not great and it's not horrible. She said, but I was trying to figure it out, and they had 4 students. A lot of their students had never been stepped foot in a traditional environment. And so this is the way they learn. They are used to collaborating. They have these skills to be able to negotiate and argue and ask questions. They had this beautiful question wall. And I mean, some of the questions on there, couldn't believe that elementary students were asking them. And then she said, but she had 4 students come that came from a very traditional environment. I won't name the school because we have lots of them here in the Valley. And she said there's just this deschooling that she's seeing that still needs to happen. So I'm curious with these kids that don't have these skills, how long are you seeing that it takes for them to be comfortable with this type of learning and to undo some of what they have been trained, since kindergarten in a traditional environment?
Well, I think one of the positive flavors of all of this is, when we first created our teaming model, and I'm thinking of a particular team where we had this conversation about, gosh, the kids, they don't know how to collaborate with each other, and they're frozen, paralyzed, like not because they're being, they're not willing to try it. It's like we didn't even know where the trailhead was to begin. And the same group of kids, that were so reluctant, to talk with each other, they were at the immersive Media and Technology Center in downtown Mesa, part of ASU's Sidney Poitier Film, College. And we were using one of their professional studios, and the kids were giving TED Talks, but in a group and with parents. And so these kids that really couldn't communicate with each other in groups, toward the end, they were leading group discussions that were being videotaped in a recording studio with dozens of parents watching. So I think that it takes a little while, but not too long. We noticed it at Zaharis. Kids would come from back to basic traditional models where they never had to share critical opinions in groups. And they would kind of look around like, what is this? And then a week later, I'd go back through the classroom and say, how you doing? And they're smiling. And it's like, okay, I think I'm catching on here. I can think a big thought, and then I can share it with people. Imagine how innovative that is. Doesn't it sound kind of silly that it's an innovation if we just let a kid think a critical thought and then share it with somebody? It's like, isn't it sad that that's where we're at?
It is. And what I saw this morning, what the groups were working on debates, and there was one girl, her partner wasn't there. And so the guide said, why don't you join the opposing, side, and you can learn from them and you can work with them. And she just was so bummed and just sitting there in the corner. She just was like so distraught that she didn't have her partner. And what I saw that was so beautiful, these groups just kind of got into it. They're getting into debates themselves, even if they're on the same side. And the guy just walked over to her. She didn't have to tell her anything, didn't say, hey, this is what you need to do. She just sat with her, provided connection. And then the girl, little by little, started opening up and presenting her side. And so I think relationship and connection is a really important part and piece of this too. It's like, oh, the adults are on my side, and then if we can model that for them, I think that's a really big part of this.
I think you hit on it, Adriane. the relationship piece is everything. And every time we hire somebody that understands the importance of developing relationships, with not only with kids, but with other adults on campus, that bring joy when they enter into a room and are willing to go on a quest of inquiry, one that's driven and fostered by curiosity. It's a wonderful world. We're working on it. I would invite you and any of the listening audience to come out to Mountain View and sign up for a tour. We'll walk you around. We'll let you see what we're doing, but more important, we'll let you feel what we're doing. That group that had visited both of our schools, there was a fellow, his name was Terrence Johnson. And he was somewhere, I think, from the Northern California. And he came up to me after we'd left one of our teaming models where our freshmen were working alongside their teachers. And he said, boy, I saw, and then he stopped and he goes, no, I felt what it feels like when kids are working and they have a voice and they're provided with spaces to exercise it. And he said it feels different. It's not that it just looks or sounds different. He goes, it does. But he says you feel it in a different way. It's a different dimension. So I would invite folks to come out to Mountain View and see what it looks like when you're 2.5 years into completely disrupting and reimagining the Great American Comprehensive High School Education System.
So exciting. You were talking about book clubs and kids choosing to learn, because if you're flipping the system, a lot of it is coercion based, right? You have to do this in this way by this time, and I'm your judge, and you're turning a lot of that on your head. And we do the same thing at Prenda, and a common pushback that I hear is, well, kids won't do anything, and it's just so. As soon as you start in this work, like, it's so blatantly obvious that kids have a very energetic force to drive the world forward and that they want to participate in this work. Our guide offers every Wednesday, you can stay later, do more school if you want to participate in what they call literature circle or book club. And all the kids stay extra to talk about literature. And no one's giving them a grade, nothing. And then they also just started, they're now, these 4th, 5th, 6th graders are taking an online college class alongside their guide who wanted to take this Charles Dickens class. She was like, I'm just going to invite my kids to stay after school again and do this. And my son is 9. I'm like, oh, like, I will admit that when she told me they were doing this, I'm like, okay, we probably hit the limit here of like outrageous things we can expect from these kids. And my 9-year-old came home and he was like, yeah, super stoked. Like, and then he's like reading, I learned the word stave the other day. Like, I didn't know that Charles Dickens was written in staves instead of chapters or something. And he was talking all about this. And I'm like, okay, like, there's literally no limit to what a child can do, can think, can become. And I think sometimes, sadly, it's us as parents and adults that, like, we limit them with our assumptions and the systems we build. Adriane, I have an earlier episode called The World We Create for Kids, if you guys want to check it out, if you're listening to this, about this topic. But so true.
Real quick, Mike, how do you balance like grades and standardized tests? Because you're in a public school system. So how do you, because I feel like, and we feel here at the KindlED podcast that grades create such a fixed mindset. So how do you balance that?
Okay. Before I answer that question, Katie, I love what you said. And I've got to share something that really would build on that. Everything that you've said, we're speaking the same language. We're drinking from the same fountain. I think that's why this has been such a good conversation, at least from my perspective. I've enjoyed every second of it. But as we're talking about, getting kids to do things, when they're not compliant, I don't believe that 3 out of 5 kids in America have an attention deficit. I think every single one of them do. And so do we. We have attention deficits for attending to boring crap. We all do.
Amen. There's the pull quote.
Think about it, right? We give kids pills that we cram down their throat because they can't sit and stare at the boring transmission of stuff, that's coming their way. And that's what school has been like in too many places. There's outlier places and outlier classrooms. If you hit the teacher lottery just right, you might get one of those teachers. But the kid that can't pay attention in school for 5 seconds can play a video game without blinking for 3 hours. So here's an example. When I was at my previous school at Zaharis. Caroline Gaynor, an amazing teacher that came from an amazing school in New York. She was a literacy coach, came out to Zaharis, and they had studied the American Revolution, even though it wasn't part of the second grade curriculum. But the fifth graders next door were doing an inquiry and they were fascinated with it. So the fifth graders started mentoring the second graders. And after this incredible inquiry that the second graders embarked upon with the fifth graders and their teachers at their side, Caroline was in the classroom and I happened to pass through. And she asked the second graders, she goes, how are we going to make our thinking visible to show what we've learned about the American Revolution? How are we going to paint a picture of what we've learned? Instead of taking a test or a worksheet, she was asking the kids. And one of the little girls said, let's create a Rube Goldberg machine. And I thought, what the heck is a Rube Goldberg machine? I felt this big that a 7-year-old was speaking a language that I couldn't understand. And so turns out a Rube Goldberg machine, if you've ever played the game Mousetrap, it's where one event trips another in some type of mechanism until finally at the end there's an outcome, like the cage that falls onto the mice. So a Rube Goldberg machine is where one event trips another until finally there's an outcome. And the teacher said, well, why would we create a Rube Goldberg machine? And she said, well, the American Revolution was one event that tripped another until finally there was an outcome. We went to war with England. And that's exactly what a Rube Goldberg machine is. So every piece of the machine that we create can represent a different part of the American Revolution. And so I wish I could show you the video. They created the most profound, tangible manifestation of what the American Revolution looks like, from a dollar bill in a boat that they created in our STEAM Design Center and Fabrication Lab using the laser wood carver, where they made a boat. Think about all the skills that come into play. They put $1 in to represent George Washington crossing the Delaware on an engine. And then in the end, after all these mechanisms went on this machine, in the end, a fan blew streamers into the air representing freedom. And it showed Kaity and Adriane, whenever you set kids free and teachers, they'll blow your mind. I continuously am in awe. And whenever I think there's a cap or a limitation to what they can do, they always show me there's more and more. And if we set them free to do this work, there's really no limitations to what they can do in changing the world. The work matters. I'd like to share with you a piece that I wrote that was my constitution, that I thought I was writing for the teachers that I honored at Zaharis, but it turns out I was really writing it for me to remind myself of what I'm about. And I'd like to share it with you because to me, it not only describes my journey, but it's kind of my constitution.
Yep, let's do it.
So this is my writer's notebook. It means everything to me. It's where I record my views of the world and my feelings and my noticings and my questions and my wonderings. And if my house was burning down, it would be one of the first things that I grab. So I wrote this many years ago, and my staff actually had it printed on this beautiful calligraphy and framed for me, and it still hangs at Zaharis School. And it's entitled, "We Pass This Way But Once," and I think it captures the essence of what we've been talking about. I like to read it, even though it's etched in my soul, but I look at the words and there's power in them. But it goes like this: we pass this way but once, 'tis true. What a glorious occasion for me and you. Our creed, our lives that we may live, some bit of inspiration give, to fashion a school and to mold the clay, for other travelers to follow the way, to spark a fire of truth and light. We'll take up our arms and engage in the fight, while the world is convinced that a test is the measure. Lost is the child, our greatest of treasures. Oh, the joy to hear them laugh and play. For just once will we pass this way. We've abandoned the script and we've taken a stand. Actors no more. We're joined hand in hand. Each new day reveals a page pure and white. What actions will cover its surface by night? Awaken the hearts of the children each day, for just once will we pass this way? Lost are the days framed by standards and tests. Oh, how simple now the answer rests within each child. Who would have thought we're to help light their lamps, not to just fill their pots? Our eyes are now open, for our cause will not sway. For just once will we pass this way. Alone, one raindrop will fade in the sun, but together the mightiest of rivers run. Our children are worth all the blood, sweat, and tears. Cowards, no more. We have nothing to fear. Our hearts are alive as we embrace each day. For just once will we pass this way. We pass this way but once, 'tis true. So wake up, sluggard. There's work to do. There are lives at stake, and shepherds are we. When we're needed the most, our sheep, we will not flee. May we live our lives, so some may say, oh, happy are we that they passed our way. I completely forgot about your question about standardized testing.
That's okay. You have to go. Yeah, I don't think that's an issue.
I have some big thoughts, but I'll share this with you. You can't check, and maybe this can lead to another meeting at another time, but you can't chop up the world into a sequence of standardized test questions and bubble in truth with a number 2 pencil. If we're going to change the system, we have to change how we measure success. And we can't use the same old stale metrics that so often measure things that we're not intending to measure, like the quality of their lived experiences away from school. And we can do better. And assessment is something that has to change, and we're changing that too. So if we had another 20 minutes, man, we could really hammer that one home.
You've got to run.
Man, this may not be the highest viewing audience that you've ever had, but I'll tell you, I sure enjoyed spending time with you, Kaity and Adriane.
Yeah.
And I applaud the work that you're doing. Something tells me we're going to connect again sometime.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks, Mike Oliver. We're so grateful that you came and shared with us today. So inspiring, and just keep doing the work that you're doing. Every child's lucky that you exist.
Oh, I'll try to live into that. And likewise with you. Till next time.
All right. Okay.
Bye-bye.
That is it for today. So, Kaity, what I got from this conversation is not only does Mike believe about these concepts for kids and inquiry-based learning, but towards the end, it's like, wow, he is living proof. Like, he lives his life this way. And I could just feel, even though it's through a computer screen, I could feel the joy that he emanates. And it's pretty cool to meet a human like that.
I'm pretty inspired, Adriane. I'm going to be honest, like ready to run through a brick wall. We're fighting the same battle in Prenda and trying to change systems and change mindsets and change hearts in order to set kids free. And it is demoralizing sometimes because it's an uphill battle. We're swimming against the current, and we do the same thing that keep thinking what's best for kids. And I can't tell you how many Prenda meetings I've been in where we're trying to make a decision, and then that is the deciding factor, is what's best for kids. And I think as long as you are making that kind of like your guideline, I think the world's going to get a lot better here.
I do too. And just even the phrase set kids free, we can say it, but to actually live it is going to change the world. So if this episode was helpful to you, please like, subscribe, and follow us on social at Prenda Learn. If you have a question you would like for us to answer, all you need to do is email us at podcast@prenda.com, or you can join our Facebook group called KindlED Collective and ask us questions over there. And you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Sunday Spark.
The KindlED podcast is brought to you by Prenda. Prenda makes it easy for you to start and run an amazing microschool based on all the things we talk about here on the KindlED podcast. If you want more information about guiding a Prenda microschool, just go to prenda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep kindling.